Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. So glad that you could join us for another segment of Health Professional Radio. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Jan Poolman. He's joining us here to discuss the risks and burdens associated with sepsis and the evaluation of vaccine candidates to potentially protect against life-threatening bacterial infections. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Jan Poolman. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Tell us a bit about yourself and your current position.
Yeah, my name is Jan Poolman. My current position is Head of Bacterial Vaccines at Janssen Vaccines, which is part of Johnson & Johnson Health Company. And I've spent all the working part of my life on bacterial vaccine development, initially with the Dutch government and later with pharmaceutical companies. So initially on pediatric vaccines. That was when I worked for GSK, Head of Bacterial Vaccines, and nowadays for adults at Janssen Vaccines.
Tell us what sepsis is and why it's so dangerous.
Well, yeah, sepsis is an overreaction of the human body to an infectious disease when it invades the body. So it can start as a harmless skin infection or somewhat less harmless, but still not dangerous urinary tract infection. But when the bacteria invade and enter the bloodstream, then the body reacts very intensively to it with an inflammatory response, and that ends up being called sepsis and can lead to septic shock and organ failure and death.
Is it related to extraintestinal pathogenic E. coli or S. aureus? To
both of them, actually. So sepsis is the clinical consequence of an infectious disease. So mostly it relates to bacteria entering the bloodstream, and E. coli and Staph aureus are the two leading pathogens, and they're jointly responsible approximately half of all sepsis cases.
But there are many other situations where it's not either of those two, correct?
Well, the other 50% are caused by other microorganisms, but E. coli, Staph aureus are the leading pathogens, and then number 3, 4, 5, et cetera, start to cause lower proportions of these events. So like I said, E. coli, Staph aureus are jointly responsible approximately half of sepsis cases.
What groups are most at risk for developing severe infections from these bacteria?
Well, it can happen to anyone, and just it can be bad luck, but it happens more early in life when your immune system is immature, so very young children, and later in life when your immune system is becoming suboptimal. So, but it can happen anywhere during lifetime, but it happens mostly in early life and later in life. So it's a U-shaped curve, actually.
Are there effective vaccines for sepsis and the associated risks?
No, they don't exist yet. And vaccine development is a public-private partnership activity. Where are the needs and where are vaccines most useful? And the efforts previously have been mostly focused on developing pediatric vaccines for young children. So that and since sepsis is for the bigger proportion, it happens later in life. Yeah, these vaccines still have to be developed.
It's my understanding that there's quite a bit of sepsis risk when you're hospitalized. Is that the case, or is that a myth and sepsis is everywhere?
Sepsis is everywhere. Actually, community onset sepsis, so just people living at home, is the largest proportion. And on a population basis, but healthcare-associated infections do cause a substantial amount of sepsis cases. So, for instance, elective surgery, when you are undergoing intensive surgery like cardiac surgery, spinal cord surgery, or like hip and knee replacements, these type of things, that poses a risk to have bacteria getting in your bloodstream and leading to sepsis.
Tell us about your pipeline of vaccine candidates.
Our focus is actually on these invasive bacterial infectious diseases that are life-threatening. And we work both on E. coli and Staph aureus. We're a little further along with E. coli, but we are also active with Staph aureus vaccine development. So that's our focus area, and we're making good progress.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add for our listeners? And is there any way to slow the growing prevalence of AMR bacteria?
Yeah, you're bringing in antimicrobial resistance. And that certainly has worsened the overall burden related to bacteremia, so bloodstream infections and sepsis. Still, the vast majority of these infectious diseases are still treatable with antibiotics, but there is a slowly growing global pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, which is worsening the situation because you are at risk to not receive the right antibiotics when you are in a life-threatening emergency situation. And you will only find out after a few days which bacterium is causing the infection and which are the antibiotics it's sensitive to. So antimicrobial resistance puts another emergency on the developing of these vaccines. So recent analysis have been done by the World Health Organizations, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, etc. And they also have demonstrated that E. coli and Staph aureus are the number 1 and 2 bacteria that are related to mortality linked to antimicrobial resistance. So it's an unfortunate situation that the antimicrobial resistance percentage globally is rising, and it keeps rising. And so it makes it even more urgent to have these vaccines available, because if you don't get the infectious disease, you don't end up having sepsis, and you don't have to worry about antimicrobial resistance. Always be careful, and if you have unresolved bacterial infection and develop high fever, please go to your doctor rapidly, because it can potentially develop into a life-threatening infection. The development of vaccine takes time, so they're not yet there, but we're working hard on it.
Well, Dr. Poolman, I appreciate you taking the time with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on Health Professional Radio.
You're most welcome.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Jan Poolman. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, subscribe, and download at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.